Welcome to a journey through time. Picture yourself nestled in a cozy corner of an ancient English tavern, the firelight flickering on stone walls, the scent of wood smoke and mead in the air. Outside, the world is quiet, save for the distant hoot of an owl or the rustle of leaves in the wind. This is the perfect moment to drift back, to lose yourself in the sweeping tale of medieval England, a story of kings and queens, knights and peasants, battles and betrayals, faith and fear that shaped a nation over centuries. So, settle in, close your eyes if you like, and let's wander together through the mists of history, where the past feels alive, whispering its secrets to us. Let's begin at the dawn of the medieval age, around the year 500, when the Roman Empire's grip on Britain had crumbled. The Romans had left behind their roads, their forts, and their cities, but also a land fractured and vulnerable. Without their legions, the island was a patchwork of small kingdoms where Britons, Celtic peoples, clashed with one another and faced new invaders. From across the North Sea came the Anglo-Saxons, tribes of Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, fierce warriors with a hunger for land. They sailed in longships, their wooden hulls slicing through the waves, landing on the shores of what we now call England. These newcomers didn't just raid, they settled, bringing their language, their gods like Woden and Thunor, and their ways of life. Villages sprang up, built of timber and thatch, where families worked the land, wove cloth, and forged iron. Over time, the Britons were pushed westward into what is now Wales and Cornwall, while the Anglo-Saxons carved out kingdoms like Wessex, Mercia, and Northumbria. Life in these early days was harsh but vibrant. Imagine a village at dawn, mist curling over fields, the clink of a blacksmith's hammer, the laughter of children chasing pigs through muddy lanes. Most people were farmers, tied to the land, growing barley, wheat, and rye. They lived by the seasons, planting in spring, harvesting in autumn, and huddling by fires in winter, telling tales of heroes and monsters. Kings ruled these kingdoms, but they weren't distant figures in golden palaces. They were warrior leaders, men who fought alongside their thanes, loyal retainers, in wooden halls filled with song and mead. A king's power came from his ability to protect his people and reward his warriors with treasure, often gold rings or silver armbands won in battle. By the 7th century, a new force began to reshape this world: Christianity. Missionaries like Augustine, sent by Pope Gregory in 597, landed in Kent. They brought with them the cross, the Bible, and a new way of seeing the world. Slowly, the old pagan gods faded, replaced by churches of stone and wood. Monasteries rose, like Lindisfarne and Jarrow, where monks in rough wool robes copied manuscripts by candlelight, preserving knowledge through the centuries. Christianity didn't just change religion. It brought literacy, law, and a sense of unity. Kings like Ethelbert of Kent and Edwin of Northumbria converted, and with them, their people followed. The church became a powerful force, its bishops advising kings, its monasteries centers of learning and art. The Book of Kells, with its swirling, intricate designs, is a testament to the beauty born in these sacred places. But peace was fleeting. In the late 8th century, a new shadow loomed: the Vikings. Picture a stormy sea, waves crashing against a dragon-prowed longship, its crew of bearded warriors chanting as they rowed toward England's shores. The first raid struck Lindisfarne in 793, a shocking attack that left the monastery in flames, its monks dead or enslaved. The Vikings weren't just raiders, they were explorers, traders, and settlers. They came from Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, driven by a thirst for wealth and adventure. Over the next century, their raids grew into invasions. They burned villages, looted churches, and demanded tribute, silver, to make them go away. By the 860s, a great heathen army landed, intent on conquest. They swept through Northumbria, Mercia, and East Anglia, leaving only Wessex standing strong. Enter Alfred the Great, a king whose name still echoes through time. Born in Wantage around 849, Alfred was no ordinary ruler. He was a scholar, a warrior, and a visionary. When the Vikings threatened to overrun Wessex, Alfred fought back. In 878, after a crushing defeat, he hid in the marshes of Athelney, a lone king in a sodden wilderness. Legend tells of him burning cakes while distracted, a humble moment for a man who would become a legend. From those marshes, Alfred rallied his people, defeated the Vikings at Edington, and forced their leader, Guthrum, to convert to Christianity. Alfred didn't just win battles. He built a kingdom. He fortified towns, called burhs, to protect against raids. He reformed laws, promoted learning, and even translated books from Latin to Anglo-Saxon so his people could read. Under Alfred, Wessex became the heart of what would one day be England. Alfred's descendants carried his dream forward. His son, Edward the Elder, and daughter Ethelfled, Lady of the Mercians, fought to reclaim land from the Vikings. By the early 10th century, their victories unified much of England under one crown. In 927, Alfred's grandson, Athelstan, became the first true king of England, ruling from the Scottish borders to the southern coast. He wasn't just a warrior, he was a diplomat, forging ties with European kings, marrying his sisters to foreign rulers. England was no longer a backwater, it was a player on the European stage. But unity didn't mean peace. The 10th and 11th centuries were turbulent. Viking raids returned with a vengeance. In 991, the Battle of Maldon saw Anglo-Saxon warriors fall to a Viking force, their bravery immortalized in a poem that captures the clash of swords and the courage of men facing death. Kings like Ethelred the Unready struggled to hold the line. Ethelred's nickname wasn't kind, he was unready, not for lack of preparation, but because his advisors gave poor counsel. He tried to buy off the Vikings with silver, a payment called danigeld, but it only encouraged more raids. By 1016, England fell to a Viking king, Knut the Great, a Dane who ruled a vast North Sea empire. Knut was no mere conqueror. He married Ethelred's widow Emma and ruled with wisdom, blending Anglo-Saxon and Viking traditions. His court was a melting pot of cultures, where English bishops and Danish jarls shared power. Knut's death in 1035 sparked chaos. His sons squabbled, and the throne passed back to the Anglo-Saxons with Edward the Confessor, a pious king whose reign was marked by intrigue. Edward, raised in Normandy, brought Norman advisors to his court, sowing tension among his Anglo-Saxon nobles. He built Westminster Abbey, a masterpiece of stone that still stands but left no heir. When he died in 1066, England stood on a knife's edge. 3 men claimed the crown: Harold Godwinson, an English noble; Harold Hardrada, a Viking king; and William, Duke of Normandy. That year, 1066, changed everything. Imagine the autumn of 1066, a crisp wind blowing across the Channel, armies gathering, and fate hanging in the balance. Harold Godwinson was crowned king, but his reign was tested immediately. Harold Hardrada landed in the north, and Harold marched to meet him. At Stamford Bridge, the Anglo-Saxons crushed the Vikings, a victory so fierce that Hardrada's army was shattered. But there was no time to celebrate. Far to the south, William of Normandy had landed at Pevensey with an army of knights, archers, and ambition. Harold raced south, his men exhausted, and met William at Hastings on October 14th, 1066. The battle was brutal. Swords clashed, arrows rained, and by day's end, Harold lay dead, an arrow through his eye, according to legend. William, now the conqueror, claimed England. William's conquest reshaped the land. He built castles, stone fortresses like the Tower of London, to control the population. The Anglo-Saxon nobles were replaced by Norman lords who spoke French and brought their own customs. The Domesday Book, compiled in 1086, was William's great survey, a snapshot of every village, pig, and plough in England, ensuring he knew exactly what he ruled. Life for the common folk changed little at first. They still toiled in the fields. But the Normans brought a new order. Feudalism took root. Lords granted land to knights who swore loyalty, while peasants worked the land in exchange for protection. It was a world of hierarchies, where everyone knew their place, from the king in his castle to the serf in his hut. The Normans didn't just build castles, they built churches, cathedrals that soared toward the heavens. Durham Cathedral, with its massive stone columns, is a testament to their ambition. The church grew even more powerful, mediating between kings and their subjects, preaching salvation, but also collecting tithes. Monks and nuns lived lives of prayer, while bishops wielded influence as great as any lord. Yet the medieval world wasn't just about power and prayer. It was a time of color and creativity. Markets buzzed with traders selling spices, wool, and wine. Minstrels sang of love and war, their lutes echoing in great halls. Illuminated manuscripts, like those from Canterbury, glowed with gold and vibrant hues, telling stories of saints and sinners. The 12th and 13th centuries saw England grow stronger, but also more troubled. Kings like Henry II, a dynamo of energy, expanded royal power. Henry's legal reforms, like trial by jury, laid the foundations of English common law. But his reign was marred by conflict, especially with Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Becket, once Henry's friend, defied the king over the church's rights. In 1170, 4 knights, believing they followed Henry's wishes, murdered Becket in his cathedral, a crime that shocked Europe. Pilgrims flocked to Canterbury, seeking miracles at Becket's shrine, and his story became a symbol of the struggle between church and crown. Henry's sons, Richard the Lionheart and John, brought their own dramas. Richard, a warrior king, spent most of his reign on crusade, battling Saladin in the Holy Land. His courage made him a legend, but his absence left England vulnerable. John, his brother, was less heroic. His reign saw disaster. He lost Normandy to France, earning the nickname Lackland. His heavy taxes and quarrels with nobles sparked rebellion. In 1215, at Runnymede, a meadow by the Thames, John was forced to sign Magna Carta, a charter promising fair treatment and limiting royal power. It was a turning point, planting the seed of constitutional government, though its immediate impact was small. John soon ignored it, and civil war followed. The 13th century brought stability under Henry III and Edward I, known as Longshanks for his towering height. Edward was a warrior king who conquered Wales, building mighty castles like Caernarfon to cement his rule. He tried to conquer Scotland too, earning the enmity of William Wallace and Robert the Bruce. At home, Edward strengthened the realm, calling parliaments where lords and commoners advised the king. These early parliaments were the roots of England's democratic tradition, though power still rested with the elite. The 14th century was a time of triumph and tragedy. England's population grew. Towns like London and York bustled, and wool exports made the kingdom rich. But then came the Black Death, a plague that swept through in 1348 to 49, killing perhaps a third of the population. Villages emptied, fields lay fallow, and fear gripped the land. Survivors faced a changed world. Labor was scarce, so peasants demanded higher wages, challenging the old feudal order. The Peasants' Revolt of 1381 saw common folk, led by men like Wat Tyler, march on London, demanding justice. The revolt was crushed, but it showed the growing power of ordinary people. War defined this century too. The 100 Years' War with France, beginning in 1337, wasn't one long battle, but a series of conflicts over English claims to French lands. Kings like Edward III and his son, the Black Prince, won stunning victories at Crécy and Poitiers, where English longbowmen proved deadly against French knights. The longbow, a simple weapon of yew or ash, could pierce armor from hundreds of yards, changing warfare forever. Yet, the war drained England's wealth and lives, and by the 15th century, France began to reclaim its lands. The 15th century brought civil war, the Wars of the Roses. Two noble houses, Lancaster and York, both claiming the throne, tore England apart. Picture battlefields soaked in blood, knights in gleaming armor, and banners of red and white roses fluttering in the wind. The war's roots lay in the weak rule of Henry VI, a pious but ineffective king. Rival nobles like Richard of York and Margaret of Anjou, Henry's fierce queen, fought for power. Battles like Towton in 1461 were brutal, with thousands slain in a single day. The throne changed hands repeatedly until Edward IV, a Yorkist, brought stability. His brother Richard III took the crown in 1483 amid rumors he'd murdered his young nephews, the princes in the Tower. Richard's reign ended at Bosworth in 1485, where he fell to Henry Tudor, a Lancastrian exile. Henry, crowned Henry VII, founded the Tudor dynasty, ending the wars and uniting the Roses. Henry VII's reign marked the close of the medieval age. He restored order, curbed the power of nobles, and filled the royal treasury. England was changing. Towns grew, trade flourished, and the first whispers of the Renaissance reached its shores. The medieval world, with its castles, knights, and feudal bonds, began to fade, giving way to a new era. As we drift back to the present, imagine leaving that ancient tavern, stepping out into the cool night air. The stars above are the same ones that shone on Alfred's marshes, William's battlefields, and Henry's court. Medieval England was a land of hardship and beauty, where faith and fear, war and wisdom wove a tapestry that still shapes the nation today. Its story lives in the stone of its cathedrals, the words of its poets, and the spirit of its people. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Sleep well, dream of the past, and may history's whispers linger in your heart. Now, dear listeners, another cozy tale to help you drift off into a peaceful slumber. We're stepping back in time, far from the noise of the modern world, to a quiet medieval village nestled in a valley where the stars seem to linger just a little longer. So let the gentle rhythm of this story carry you away. Picture the soft glow of candlelight, the distant hoot of an owl, and the comforting creak of wooden beams in an old tavern. Ready? Let's begin. The medieval village of Elderglow sat cradled between rolling hills, where the River Wren wound its way like a silver thread through fields of barley and rye. It was a place untouched by the rush of time, where the days moved as slowly as the clouds drifting across the endless sky. The village wasn't grand. No towering castles or bustling markets here, just a cluster of thatched cottages, a stone bridge, and a mill whose wheel turned lazily with the river's flow. The air always carried the scent of freshly baked bread, wood smoke, and the faint sweetness of wild flowers that grew along the forest's edge. As dawn broke over Elderglow, the first rays of sunlight spilled over the hills, painting the thatched roofs in hues of gold and amber. The village stirred softly. A rooster crowed from the edge of a small farm, its call mingling with the clatter of a wooden bucket as a young girl named Lila fetched water from the well. Her footsteps were light on the cobblestone path, her breath visible in the cool morning air. Lila was no older than 16, with auburn hair tied loosely with a strip of cloth, and eyes that sparkled like the river under moonlight. She hummed a tune her mother had taught her, a melody passed down through generations, as she balanced the bucket on her hip. The well sat at the heart of the village, surrounded by a low stone wall, worn smooth by years of hands leaning against it. It was the gathering place for Elderglow's folk, where stories were swapped as readily as buckets of water. As Lila lowered her pail into the well's depths, she heard the familiar creak of the baker's door across the square. Old Tom, the baker, emerged, his apron dusted with flour, his face creased with a smile as warm as the loaves he pulled from his oven. "Morning, Lila," he called, his voice carrying the gravelly warmth of someone who'd spent a lifetime laughing. "Got a fresh batch of rye cooling if you've a mind to stop by?" Lila grinned, pulling the bucket up with a practiced tug. "Only if you've saved me one with extra crust, Tom," she teased. Their banter was a morning ritual, as predictable as the sun's rise, and it set the tone for the day. Elderglow was a place of routines, of familiar faces, and small kindnesses. The blacksmith's hammer would soon ring out, the shepherd's flock would bleat as they were led to pasture, and the weaver's loom would hum in the little shop by the bridge. Life here was simple, but it was full. Beyond the well, the village square was coming to life. A cart rattled past, driven by Mara, a farmer's widow who sold apples and herbs from her small orchard. Her cart was piled high with baskets of rosy fruit, their scent mingling with the bundles of lavender and rosemary tied with twine. Mara waved to Lila, her weathered hands steady on the reins of her old mare, Daisy, who plodded along with the patience of a beast who knew every path in the valley. "Fine morning, isn't it?" Mara called, her voice bright, despite the early hour. Lila nodded, splashing a bit of water as she hauled her bucket free. "Finest yet," she replied, and they both laughed, though nothing particularly funny had been said. It was just the way of things in Elderglow. Laughter came easily. The village wasn't without its mysteries, though. Tucked at the edge of the forest, where the trees grew thick and ancient, stood the old stone tower. No one knew who'd built it or when. Its walls were covered in ivy, its single-arched window dark and empty, like the eye of a sleeping giant. The elders said it was older than the village itself, older even than the hills. Some claimed it was a watchtower from a forgotten war. Others whispered it had been a sorcerer's lair, though no one in Elderglow had ever seen magic with their own eyes. Lila, like most of the village children, had grown up daring her friends to knock on the tower's heavy oak door, only to run giggling back to the safety of the square when their courage faltered. But there was one person in Elderglow who didn't laugh at the tower's tales. Old Agnes, the village herbalist, lived in a cottage at the forest's edge, not far from the tower's shadow. Her home was a riot of drying herbs, jars of strange roots, and shelves lined with books so old their pages crinkled like autumn leaves. Agnes was an enigma, kind but sharp-tongued, with eyes that seemed to see more than they should. She'd been young once, or so the villagers assumed, but no one could remember her as anything but old. Her hair was a wild tangle of silver, and her hands, though gnarled, moved with a precision that belied her years. When Lila was younger, she'd been afraid of Agnes, but now she found herself drawn to the old woman's stories, especially the ones about the tower. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and the village settled into the quiet of twilight, Lila found herself at Agnes's door. She'd been sent to fetch a salve for her little brother, who'd scraped his knee chasing geese. The air was cool, scented with pine and the faint smoke of Agnes's fire. The herbalist welcomed her in, gesturing to a stool by the hearth. "Sit, child," Agnes said, her voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "The salve's nearly ready, but you'll not rush me." Lila didn't mind. She liked the warmth of the cottage, the way the firelight danced on the walls, casting shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. As Agnes stirred a small pot over the fire, she began to speak, her words weaving a tale as easily as the weaver wove cloth. "You've heard the stories about the tower, I reckon," she said. not looking up from her work. Lila nodded, though Agnes couldn't see. "Everyone has," she replied, her voice soft. "They say it's haunted, or cursed, or something." Agnes chuckled, a low, throaty sound. "Folks say a lot of things. Most of it's nonsense. But the tower, it's no ordinary place. It remembers, Lila. It holds secrets older than the stones it's built from." Lila leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "What kind of secrets?" she asked. Agnes paused, her spoon hovering over the pot. For a moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant call of a nightjar. "The kind that don't like being found," Agnes said at last. "But I'll tell you this. Long ago, before Elderglow was even a name, there was a woman who lived in that tower. Not a sorceress, mind you, but a keeper of stories. She wrote them down, every tale the wind carried to her, every whisper from the stars. They say her books are still there, hidden in the walls, waiting for someone brave enough to claim them." Lila's eyes widened. Books? In the tower? She'd never heard this part of the story before. Agnes nodded, her gaze distant. "Aye, but they're not for just anyone. The tower chooses who it lets in, and it doesn't always let them out." The words hung in the air, heavy and strange. Lila shivered, though the fire was warm. She wanted to ask more, but Agnes handed her the jar of salve and shooed her out with a gentle, "Go on now, your brother's waiting." That night, as Lila lay in her bed under the thatched roof of her family's cottage, she couldn't stop thinking about the tower. The idea of hidden books, of stories waiting in the dark, tugged at her like a thread caught on a thorn. She'd always loved stories, her mother's lullabies, her father's tales of far-off lands, the songs the traveling minstrels brought to Elderglow each spring. But the thought of stories so old they belonged to the stars themselves, that was something else entirely. The next morning, Lila woke with a plan. She'd go to the tower, not to knock and run, like she had as a child, but to step inside, to see if Agnes's tale was true. She told no one, not even her best friend Alara, who worked at the mill and was always up for an adventure. This felt like something Lila had to do alone. She waited until midday, when the village was busy with chores, and no one would notice her slipping away. With a small sack of bread and cheese tucked under her arm, she followed the path to the forest, her heart beating a little faster with each step. The tower loomed ahead, its stones grey and weathered, its ivy swaying gently in the breeze. Up close, it seemed larger than Lila remembered, its presence heavy, as if it were watching her. The oak door was carved with strange symbols, worn but still visible, like the ripples of a long-forgotten language. Lila hesitated, her hand hovering over the iron ring that served as a handle. Agnes's words echoed in her mind. The tower chooses who it lets in. She took a deep breath, pushed the door, and to her surprise, it swung open with a low groan. Inside, the air was cool and musty, smelling of stone and time. A spiral staircase wound upward, its steps uneven and worn. Lila's footsteps echoed as she climbed, her hand trailing along the wall for balance. The only light came from the arched window high above, casting a pale glow that barely reached the lower steps. At the top, she found a single room, its walls lined with shelves, and there, just as Agnes had said, were books, dozens of them, their leather covers cracked and dusty, their pages yellowed but intact. Lila's breath caught. She reached for the nearest book, its cover embossed with a symbol like a crescent moon. As her fingers brushed the leather, a strange warmth spread through her, as if the book were alive. She opened it, half expecting the pages to crumble, but they were strong, the ink still bold. The words were in a script she didn't recognize, yet somehow she understood them. They told of a traveler who sailed across a sea of stars, of a forest where trees whispered secrets to those who listen, of a time when the hills around Elderglow were young and the river was but a trickle. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. Lila read until the light from the window began to fade, her mind filled with images of worlds she'd never imagined. She wanted to take the book, to show it to Agnes, to prove the stories were real. But as she stood, the room seemed to shift, the walls shimmering like water. A voice, not heard, but felt deep in her bones, whispered, "Stay, or take one story and leave." Lila froze. The tower was speaking to her, just as Agnes had said it might. She looked at the book in her hands, then at the shelves filled with countless others. She could stay, read forever, lose herself in the stories. But Elderglow was waiting. Her family, her friends, the life she knew. With a trembling hand, she placed the book back on the shelf. "I'll come back," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was promising the tower or herself. The voice didn't answer, but the door at the bottom of the stairs opened silently, letting in the cool evening air. Lila stepped out into the twilight, the village glowing softly in the distance. She felt different, as if a piece of the tower's magic had stayed with her. When she returned to Agnes's cottage the next day, the old woman only smiled, her eyes knowing. "You found it, didn't you?" she said. Lila nodded, unable to find words. Agnes patted her hand. "Keep its secrets, child. And when you're ready, go back. The tower will be waiting." Life in Elderglow went on as it always had. The mill turned, the baker baked, the river flowed. But Lila was changed. She carried the tower's stories in her heart, and sometimes, when the village was quiet and the stars were bright, she'd walk to the forest's edge and look at the tower, its silhouette dark against the sky. She didn't go back, not yet, but she knew she would, one day, when the time was right. And so, traveller, as the fire in Elderglow's hearths burns low and the village sleeps, let this tale settle over you like a warm blanket. Dream of cobblestone paths, of ancient towers and hidden books, of a place where stories live forever. Good night, until we meet again beneath the stars.